Okay, this video is on solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. Now, we've already seen that some quadratic equations can be solved by factoring. For example, let's say the quadratic equation x squared minus 6x plus 8 equals 0. Well, this is a quadratic expression that we could factor. I'd factor it into, let's see, looks like 2 and 4 and negative 2 and negative 4. So negative 2 times negative 4 gives me positive 8. And I add them together to get negative 6. So I would factor this quadratic expression into these two factors. I would set each factor equal to 0, and I could solve for x. Other quadratic equations can be solved just by using square roots. For example, x squared minus 17 equals 0. And we've seen how anytime we have an expression, a quadratic expression that doesn't have that middle term, it doesn't have that b value, or the b value is equal to 0, then we can just, in this case, add 17 to both sides of the equation. And that would make the equation look like x squared equals 17. And then just take the square root of each side of the equation, and we would get, in this case, x equals positive or negative square root of 17. And we need the positive and negative there because we know that we always have two solutions for a quadratic equation. Well, it turns out that some equations we can solve using this method, some using this method, but we can always solve any quadratic equation using this thing called the quadratic formula. And the quadratic formula you have there in your notes, it looks like this. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Now, this formula can be used to solve for x for any quadratic formula as long as it's in the form, say this must be in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And you'll hopefully recognize ax squared plus bx plus c, this is what we've been calling the standard form of a quadratic expression. And this value for a, b, and c, whatever those values are in the quadratic expression, those are the numbers that we're going to be plugging in to this formula to solve for x. So let's take a look at a couple of examples. So example number 1. Turns out this quadratic equation I can actually solve by factoring. So I'm going to first solve it by factoring, and then I'm going to solve it using the quadratic formula, and hopefully I'm going to get the same answers for both methods of solving. So if I solve this by factoring, then I'm going to factor this quadratic expression into two factors. Let's see, I need numbers that multiply to give me 6 and add to give me 5. I think that's going to be 2 and 3. And oops, no, it's not going to be 2 and 3. It's going to be 1 and 6. Because I need a negative 5. So positive 1 times negative 6 gives me negative 6. And positive 1x and negative 6x gives me negative 5x. So this is the factored form of this expression. I set each factor equal to 0, and I subtract 1. In this case, I get x equals negative 1. I add 6 for this equation, and I get x equals 6. And here are my two solutions for this quadratic equation. Well, let's see what it looks like to solve this same quadratic equation using the quadratic formula. So first thing I want to do is I want to note what my values are going to be for a, b, and c, because what I'm going to be using is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of, b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. So I want to make sure I know what my values of a, b, and c are. Well, for this particular quadratic equation, my a value equals 1. My b value, notice my b value is not 5, it's negative 5. So b equals negative 5. And my c value is negative 6. Well, now I know what my a, b, and c values are. All I need to do is plug them into my formula and then do a little bit of arithmetic and simplify my answers. So x is going to be equal to my solutions, negative b, so that's negative 5, plus or minus the square root of, let's see, b squared, that's negative 5 squared, minus 4 times a is 1, times c is negative 6, divided by 2 times a, and a is 1, so 2 times 1. All right, now I've got all my numbers plugged in. I just need to simplify this expression. Negative 5, that's going to be positive 5, plus or minus the square root of negative 5 squared is 25. Let's see, minus 4 times 1, that's negative 4 times negative 6, that's going to give me a positive 24. And 2 times 1 is 2. So let's see, 5 plus or minus the square root of 49 divided by 2. So 5 plus or minus, square root of 49 is 7, and I've already got my plus and minus here, so plus or minus 7 divided by 2. Now if I just split this up into two fractions here, let's see, I've got 5 plus 7, which is 12, divided by 2. And then I've got 5 minus 7, which is negative 2 divided by 2. And I can see now my two values for x are going to be x equals 12 divided by 2, which is 6. That was my first answer here. Or x equals negative 2 divided by 2, which is negative 1. And that's my other answer. So let's take a look at example number 2. Now here's a problem that I might be able to factor that problem, although it might be a little bit more difficult. So I'm just going to use the quadratic formula on this one. And let me start by identifying my a, b, and c values. A is going to be equal to 2. B is negative 8. And c is positive 7. So again, all I need to do is plug those values into my formula, which is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. All right, let's see. Negative b is going to be negative 8 plus or minus square root of negative 8 squared minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is 7, divided by 2 times a is 2. All right, so let's see here. Negative 8, that's positive 8, plus or minus negative 8 squared is 64, minus, let's see, 4 times 2 times 7, 2 times 4 is 8, 8 times 7 is 56, divided by 2 times 2 is 4. All right, let's see, 8 plus or minus square root of, let's see, 64 minus 56, that's 8 over 4. And I can simplify the square root of 8. Let's see, 8 plus or minus, if I write that as 4 times 2, then 4 is a perfect square factor, which I can bring out here. So that's going to give me 8 plus or minus, let's see, bring out the 4, that becomes a 2. So that's 2 times square root of 2 over 4. Now I break it into two fractions. That gives me 8 over 4 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 2 over 4. 8 over 4 is 2 plus or minus, and this will reduce to 1/2 times the square root of 2. And now I can just write my answer like this, 2 plus or minus this 1/2 times the square root of 2. Sometimes people prefer to break those apart and write them as two separate values. So for example, x equals 2 plus 1/2 times the square root of 2, or x equals 2 minus 1/2 square root of 2. And if you would prefer to write your answer like this, that's fine too. Most people just write it in this kind of compact form like that.